Hi Founder fans, Jason here with the new hat, and today's founder is John Lamb. Now John Lamb's a very interesting character because he was raised by his father to take over the family business, which was optician, and you don't hear of a lot of opticians back in the colonial days, but when John Lamb grew up, he found a career he preferred: wine cellar. Now, once the Tea Act and the Stamp Act come along and things start getting tough for most merchants, these didn't directly affect the wine trade for John Lamb, but he did see how adversely affected many of his fellow merchants were in and around New York City where he lived, and as such, he joined the rebellion and was a leader. And when war broke out, he actually did help to attack the British in New York and then joined the Continental Army as a captain of artillery. And in this position, he followed Richard Montgomery up to Canada for the invasion of Quebec, where unfortunately the Americans lost, and Mr. Lamb was taken as a prisoner. I should say Captain Lamb was taken as a prisoner, where he spent about half a year before being released and going back to the Continental Army. After this, he was stationed at West Point as the captain of artillery there under William Heath. Now, West Point seemed like it would be an important fort, but it didn't really have a whole lot of action throughout the war. But either way, this was good for John Lamb because he survived the war, spending most of his time there, including while Benedict Arnold was found out to be a traitor there. But Lamb was called into service when he went south to join the army at the Battle of Yorktown, and he was present for the Battle of Yorktown, and none other than Henry Knox, the artilleryman himself, gave an accommodation to John Lamb for his service. And furthermore, in the final days of the war, well after the hostilities were over, but just before the Continental Army was dissolved, many people were given a brevet promotion, which is a technical way to say an honorable an honorary promotion. And John Lamb was given a brevet promotion to Brigadier General in the Continental Army. And it does count. He can walk around calling himself a Brigadier General, despite its honorary connotation. Just wanted to put that out there. So John Lamb goes back to New York City and takes up his practice, but he's actually appointed by the Continental Congress as the customs collector for the port of New York City. Now, at this time, under the Articles of Confederation, this didn't mean much, but within 30 years and throughout most of the 19th century, customs collector at the port of New York City would actually be one of the most important federal positions in the country, because as New York City became the place to import things, being the customs collector at that port meant you were bringing in a substantial portion of the federal government's money, especially back before there was income taxes of any nature. So John Lamb goes and takes over this position, and then when the ratification debates over the Constitution come into play, John Lamb is actually a pretty radical anti-federalist and writes about anti-federalism, which is interesting because he held what was quickly becoming one of the most important federal positions before there was a federal government. He didn't seem to think anything was wrong with collecting money for the Continental Congress, but having places like Rhode Island or Delaware make laws for New York State, that was too much for him to bear. Either way, once the Constitution was passed and Lamb lost his anti-federalist argument, George Washington, who again had previously promoted him to Brigadier General, knew of his work and still kept him on as the customs collector at the port of New York City. And he held this position for 13 years when, unfortunately, he ran into a bit of trouble. You see, John Lamb had helped someone out. There was a gentleman he knew who had gone to prison for having debt, and Lamb, out of the kindness of his heart, bailed him out, paid off his debts, and gave him a job. A few years later, Lamb's partner at his firm died. And shortly thereafter, this other gentleman that he had bailed out of prison kind of disappeared. And then it turns out that person had been embezzling funds from John Lamb, and not just any funds, his personal funds and federal funds. Now, this led to an investigation by none other than Alexander Hamilton, who was really understanding about Lamb's position, despite them being political enemies. He understood, obviously, this person screwed John Lamb. John Lamb was not the one making these crimes happen. But either way, Hamilton gives Lamb the ability to pay off this debt he now has with property he owned. Unfortunately for him, some other political enemies were able to devalue the property when the federal government made the purchase, received the land in place of these funds. So in the end, it did bankrupt John Lamb. but he was able to pay his debts back to the federal government and recoup some of his personal finances, but for the most part, when he passed away the following year, his fortune had disappeared. So that is a sad ending to a fun story. So thank you for watching. Definitely hit like on your way out and subscribe if you're new here for videos about the American Revolution 5 days a week. And I'll be back with a new founder for you tomorrow.